Hey guys, this is Candle and welcome to a new collection update video. It's been a little while. As I may have mentioned last time, I had a major car repair last year that pretty much broke my gaming budget for the rest of the year. So I've only been able to buy piecemeal, new releases since. I've got my credit card paid off now, so I can finally go out and get a whole bunch of games, and I got a decent stack here. About half of these are new releases or newish releases from the last year or so. The other half are retro games or, recent releases or whatever. Because, well, one of the GameStops near me shut down. The one I actually have been going to as my primary GameStop for like the last 20 years shut down. However, there was another one not far away that now has a retro gaming section inside it where they've got, things going back all the way to the NES. Of course, like all the loose carts and the cardboard box carts are behind glass, and then everything else, they've got the plastic cases on the shelf with the cartridges and discs behind the counter, just like everything else at GameStop. So I just picked up a like half dozen games from there, and so most of these I haven't played yet, but I still kind of want to go through them and give my thoughts on what they are and why I got them. So we're going to start things off with Shin Megami Tensei 4 for the 3DS. Now, I'm not a Shin Megami Tensei fan. I've actually never played a Shin Megami Tensei game. However, I do have SMT5 on the Switch. I don't have Vengeance, I just have Base 5. I am somewhat interested in this. I just don't know too much about it, and I would love to go back and play the, starting from the original, which I think was on the Super Famicom. I don't know if it ever actually came stateside, so I might have to look into that and stuff like that. But I am glad to have SMT4. As far as I know, this is an anthology JRPG series, kind of like Final Fantasy, where every numbered entry, it follows a different cast of characters and stuff like that. Although I think there's probably some kind of shared lore. I know there's also, this is kind of like a precursor to Pokemon in that there's a whole bunch of like monster collecting involved like that. But of course, like different vibes and everything like that. Still, definitely interested in giving this a check out, giving this a look-see at some point. Definitely glad to have it added to my collection. Something I did already have, though not this specific version, is Final Fantasy 13 on the 360. Now, you guys know I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan, and I already had pretty much every Final Fantasy game on 360. Actually, yeah, I do have every Final Fantasy game on 360 because I have Final Fantasy 11 and the two physical expansions, plus 13 and both of its sequels, and those are the only ones released on the 360. However, the version of 13 I have is the Platinum Hits version, and this is more like the standard launch version. So I'm definitely glad to have that added to my collection. Huge Final Fantasy fan, you guys know me, so I kind of want to get like every variant I can of the Final Fantasy games. So we'll see how well that goes in the future. I do have at least one copy of most of the games. I'm really only missing a couple of the PS2 games, the Game Boy games, and really that's it, I think. Maybe a couple of the more modern releases and re-releases. I'm missing like a couple different platforms of them and so on. But other than that, it's just individual variants, collector's editions, stuff like that I'm missing. Another one I picked up, came out in the last year or so, and I've been interested in playing it, is Lego Horizon Adventures. Now, I loved Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West, and I love Lego, but this feels like a tonal mismatch to me, and as soon as the first trailer for this dropped, I was like, what the hell are they thinking? Because Lego is usually happy-go-lucky, the games tend to be towards comedic, and Horizon is this super serious, solemn, somewhat depressing post-apocalyptic sci-fi adventure story. And so it feels like this huge tonal mismatch. So I definitely want to give this a look-see and try this out at some point. I do want to get the remaster for Zero Dawn at some point as well. I don't have that yet. But I also need to pick up the PS4 version of Forbidden West at some point as well. And if I really want to get all the variants, then Zero Dawn Complete on the PS4 too, because I just have the launch edition for that. And I think there was a Forbidden West Complete on the PS5 as well. I'm not sure. But definitely looking forward to giving this a try and playing it and so on. Because this is largely a recap of Zero Dawn, I think, except it is, it's all Lego-fied. I don't think there's like any Forbidden West content in here, but I could be wrong. If we ever get a Lego Horizon 2, maybe that'll be Forbidden West. Hopefully, though, Guerrilla Games is working on Lego Horizon, or not Lego Horizon, on Horizon 3. So, because they kind of left a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of Forbidden West and its DLC, and I would very much like to see how it all concludes and stuff like that. Another game came out in the last year that I've been really looking forward to and had not been able to pick up a copy yet was Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. I really enjoyed the original Space Marine on PS3. I'm not a huge Warhammer or even Warhammer 40k fan. I know of the tabletop game. I've never played it. I know it's incredibly expensive to collect for. In fact, my brother-in-law is a Warhammer 40k. Yeah, I don't know if he really plays it at all, or if he just collects the minifigs and stuff like that. But my sister probably has to deal with trying to talk him down a lot on buying a lot of expensive sets. But it is what it is. Anyways, I'm still very much interested in playing Space Marine 2. The Amazon Prime anthology short series Secret Level includes a short that ties into Space Marine 2, or at least uses a few of the characters. And I really enjoyed that as well. So I'm very much looking forward to giving this a try and playing this and stuff like that. Okay, the next game, I need to preface this by saying I do not endorse the original IP or its creator. The only reason I picked this up is because of nostalgia and the fact that I got it used. I was not going to buy a brand new copy of this game. I knew that from the beginning, and I'm still very much interested in playing it. I don't know if I'm ever going to buy any of the DLC because I cannot support the original creator and her worldviews, and I don't want any money going to her, even though I know the way this worked out. She kind of already got paid for the license. I don't think she gets direct royalties off of DLC or individual game sales. I just don't want to support her, and by buying used, none of my money goes to the developers, and as such, none of it goes to her. And that is, of course, I'm talking about Hogwarts Legacy. So this is the biggest Harry Potter game. It's set like 100 years before Harry Potter itself, and has one of the most comprehensive and explorable versions of Hogwarts. And I was a huge Harry Potter fan as a kid, to the point that my first forays into writing were as a Harry Potter fan fiction. And I still love the books and the original movies. I have no intent on really watching the new HBO show, or, like I said, supporting the author going forward. But I still wanted to have a copy of this in my collection. Any other Harry Potter games that come out, like I said, I'll buy them used. I might still get some of the original tie-ins. Like you can see on my shelf here a bit, I've got the Game Boy Advance versions of Harry Potter 1 and 2. I also have various other movie tie-in games from Harry Potter 1 and 2. And I do want to get the rest of them at some point for my collection. But it's all secondhand, because those are way out of print. Those are like 15-20-year-old games at this point. So anyways, glad to add this to my collection. Can't support the author. All right. So the last of the games I picked up today, and the last retro game, would be MotorStorm for the PS3. I have never actually played any of these. I've heard good things about this, and I know it's like a large open, I think it's open world off-road racing game. And I'm very much interested in trying it out. So definitely glad to add this to my collection. Always glad to add more 360 game or PS3 games. So the next is all new or recent releases from this year, pretty much. And the first one I want to talk about is Expedition 33, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 to begin with. This copy is sealed because I played the game through Game Pass, but I still wanted to support the developers because this is an amazing, phenomenal game. If you really like JRPGs, if you like turn-based combat, this is definitely a game to love. It is a game to enjoy. It is also a game that will make you cry, probably at several points. It had me crying like no other after just the prologue, the first hour and a half. There was a twist about halfway through that had me in tears, and the way this game ends, it's incredibly sad regardless of which ending you get. I mean, it's French. What can you expect? But it is still just an absolutely beautiful game. Amazing visuals, amazing music, really well told story. Very good gameplay. The only gripe I have with it is the parry dodge system. So the way the combat works is it's entirely turn-based, and you can kind of see the turn order on the side, kind of like Final Fantasy X. However, it pulls in kind of a dodge parry system similar to games like Super Mario RPG, where you can do these, button presses during attacks for extra damage, or by pressing the right button at the right time when the enemy is attacking, you can dodge or even parry their attacks. Problem is that it can be tough to pull off these dodges or parries sometimes. Parries more than dodges because the timing window is much smaller. There are also two different dodges you have to look out for, two different parries you have to look out for, because there are certain attacks that can only can only be dodged using the special dodge. Certain attacks that can only be parried using the special parry. And like if you try any of the other buttons, you're going to take damage. And beyond that, some of these timing windows are just so tough that it can be really hard to pull off, and you will end up taking damage. There's no way to lower the difficulty on that. This game does have difficulty options. And it has an accessibility option that will automatically pass all of the QTEs during your attacks, but there's no way to fine tune the dodging and parry windows. And my reaction times were not good enough, so I was struggling on quite a bit of those. And the way that the combat is structured, the way that the game is balanced, you pretty much have to be at least dodging most of these hits in order to survive. And you should be parrying a lot of them as well, because otherwise you are not going to be dealing out enough damage, generally. These fights will end up being slogs, and if you cannot dodge, if you cannot parry, they're just going to either take forever or your party's going to get wiped just like that. So that is unfortunate. However, like I said, it's a beautiful game. It is a very wonderfully sounding game. It's a very well told story, and it's a very good game. I would definitely recommend picking it up. It's available on Game Pass. It's available on, I think, PlayStation Plus Premium, I think. It's also available, like I said, physical copies or digital copies on Xbox Series X and S and PS5. I don't think there are any last-gen versions, though, unfortunately, and I don't think it's on Switch. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up coming to Switch too at some point. Next up is another game that is sealed because I downloaded it through Game Pass. I have not actually played it yet. However, I am very much interested in trying this, and that is Atomfall, which is kind of, at least it was pitched to me as a poor man's Fallout, where it's kind of a mix between Fallout and Stalker. It's in terms of premise, where it's set in kind of a post-apocalyptic northern England after a massive radiation event. So you're wandering this kind of English countryside / radioactive wasteland, kind of similar to Pripyat and Chernobyl and Stalker, or the various wastelands and Fallout, where it's got that kind of dry British sense of humor and stuff like that. And very much interested in playing this at some point. But I haven't actually checked it out yet because there are a number of other games I've been playing, some larger than others. Speaking of which, we'll actually jump to the game I'm currently playing right now, which took me a little bit to get into for some reason, and that is Assassin's Creed Shadows. I was very much looking forward to this when it came out. I had a pre-order since last year, even before it got delayed and stuff like that. It took me a little bit to get into this, though, mostly because of two reasons. First off, you've got two protagonists. You've got the samurai Yasuke, and you have the shinobi Naoe. And my issue was not really either of them, but they're not both unlocked at the beginning of the game. You start off with Yasuke, then you play a little bit of Naoe, then go back to Yasuke a little bit, and then when you finally get to go out and explore the open world and stuff, you're stuck with Naoe for a good chunk of the game. I haven't even unlocked Yasuke yet, and I've been playing the game for probably like 20, maybe 30 hours. At least 15 to 20 hours. Just exploring as Naoe and stuff like that. And I don't mind that, but I was struggling to get a handle on her combat a bit. Because I tend to, with Assassin's Creed, I tend to be a bit much more of a brawler, which is definitely what Yasuke is geared towards, where Naoe, being a shinobi, is geared more towards stealth and actual assassinations and stuff. And I can do that, and I don't mind doing that. In fact, one of the things I love about Assassin's Creed is being an assassin. But quite often I would end up in a cock-up cascade as Yahtzee from Fully Ramblematic. Had to remember the name of his new show. As Yahtzee from Fully Ramblematic calls it, where I start out in stealth, and then I get spotted, and all of a sudden, like, I either have to stand my ground and fight, or I have to run away and hide. And the problem is, Naoe, at least at the beginning of the game, is not really strong enough to stand there and fight. since she's much more geared towards being stealthy and you know, hiding and fighting from the shadows and stuff like that. But also I was having issues where I would go and I would hide successfully, but it would take forever. I'm talking like upwards of 10-15 minutes of just sitting there waiting for the guards and enemies to reset and go back, you know, basically stop looking for me. And it ended up, I would end up getting discouraged where I would fail a fight and end up either having to sit there and wait forever or die and have to reload and reload and reload. So that kind of discouraged me from keeping playing. And the other reason why I stopped playing for a bit was the fact that Naoe's story is very much that, you know, I would say, classic Assassin's Creed story where it's very much couched in this is a revenge story because of the death of a father figure. It happens in like half of all Assassin's Creed games where either the character's father or stepfather or some other kind of father figure dies very early on, and you know that the main character's entire arc is based around revenge and you know how hollow that kind of pursuit gets to be and stuff like that. And that's very much how Naoe's story starts as well. So that kind of put me off of playing it for a bit. However, I am getting back into it, and I am enjoying the game, and I'm enjoying exploring feudal Japan and stuff like that. It's not as detailed, I would say, as Ghost of Tsushima was, or as I would say probably Ghost of Yotei is going to be. However, it is, you know, it's Assassin's Creed. You know, it's what have you. If you've played any of the major recent Assassin's Creed games since Origins, you know how this plays. Like, the only one that kind of scaled things back really was Mirage. They keep just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and Shadows is no exception. But still, I'm enjoying it, and very much interested in seeing how things work out. Based on what I've heard, I'm not that far away from unlocking Yasuke, but we'll see how it goes. Anyways, next up is a game that is, again, it's sealed. I have not opened it yet. I did play a little bit of it because this is a re-release of a game that came out on the Wii U. And that is Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. Now, I played a little bit of this. I think the original game came out in 2013, 2014. And I played a little bit of it when I picked it up in 2016, 2017, something like that. But I never really got far into it. And so I definitely had to pick this up, though, because I'm a huge Xenoverse fan. More specifically because of Xenosaga. I know the Xenoblade games aren't directly tied to it, to Xenosaga or Xenogears, but they do use a lot of the same thematic elements, and there are some shared elements and things like Zohar's make an appearance and stuff like that. So I'm definitely interested in playing, you know, the Xenoblade Chronicles games at some point. I have all of them now. I think the only one I'm missing is Xenoblade Chronicles 3D for the new 3DS. Because I have it on the Wii and I have the Definitive Edition on the Switch. I'm just missing the 3DS version. But other than that, I have like all of the Xenoverse games, going all the way back to the Xenogears. And at some point, I really do want to play through them, but I want to kind of start at the very beginning and see how the entire, you know, expanded franchise has evolved over the years, from Xenogears to Xenosaga to Xenoblade, and see how things go from there. So until I get to that point, this is probably going to remain sealed. However, when I do play Xenoblade Chronicles X, it will probably be this version as my primary source rather than the Wii U version, just simply because I think there's like extra content or whatever, or at least it's this is, as it says, the Definitive Edition. So this should be the version to play. At least it's the most accessible right now. You know, unless you get a Wii U and make sure it works, because those things have an issue where unless you make sure it's got like the current firmware update, they can end up being bricked over time if not plugged in for long enough. So, anyways, that's not good. But anyways, the next game I got, the last game I got, is one I had been wanting since it was announced, and is the reason why I picked up a very expensive PS1 game early last year I think it was, that I knew I was never actually going to play. And that is the Suikoden 1 and 2 HD collection. So this includes both Suikoden 1, which is subtitled The Gate Rune Wars, and Suikoden 2, which is subtitled The Dunin Unification Wars. And so I'm very much excited to play these. I have opened this. I was going to do a Let's Play. In fact, I even recorded the first 2 hours of Suikoden 1. However, I wasn't feeling it at that point and ended up going off to play some other games instead. So I am going to get through this and play through it at some point. I'm not sure that this is Let's Play material, in part because of how expansive the game gets and how involved the game gets. Because this is a weird game series. It is a classic JRPG series. I mean, Suikoden 2 is hailed as one of the great JRPG masterpieces, not just on the PS1, but in general. And but they're not just straight up traditional turn-based JRPGs. Yeah, the combat is turn-based, but there's also RTS elements and strategy game elements, and there's like over a cast of like over 100 different characters that you can recruit depending on your actions in the game. And it's like you have to know, like, basically follow a guide at this point in order to recruit all of them. And I'm not even sure if you can do that all at once, or if like there's a new game plus mode that you have to play to do that. So I kind of want to play through this blind just to see, and then maybe at some point come through and play with a guide to get all the characters and stuff like that. And I do have in mind the works for a project that would require me to do something like that if I ever decided to cover the Suikoden games during that. But I'm not entirely sure whether or not that project is going to go forward. That was one of the reasons why I went back and did a Let's Play for Doom the Dark Ages, which you'll notice is not in this pile. That's because I was initially going to play it through Game Pass, but when I decided to do a Let's Play, I bought the premium edition instead for the 2 days early access, plus the fact that I knew I was going to get the DLC at some point, and I knew I wanted it on Steam at some point. It's Doom. Yeah, you gotta play it on PC. So if I do ever pick up a copy of Doom the Dark Ages, it's physical, of course it'll be on... well, actually, I think the only physical version is PlayStation 5 at this point. But even then, I'm not entirely sold on getting that because the game isn't actually on the disc. The game disc is literally like 85 megabytes. It's just a digital key on the disc, where like the upcoming Switch 2 game key cards, or as you've seen on other Switch games where they require an internet download because the whole game's not on the game card, where it's literally just a key. And I'm just all right. If all you're here is the collection update, you can bow out now. No problem at all. Because I'm about to go into a rant, a short rant here on game preservation and stuff like that. Because I don't know what Nintendo is thinking. I mean, I do, but I don't. I understand why they're doing what they're doing. I just hate it. I am, first and foremost, I am a player. I am a gamer. Like, most of these games on this wall here, I have played and beaten most of these games. However, as you can tell by the fact that I have a literal wall of video games in my apartment, I'm also a collector. That's the reason why these videos exist, because I love having things like this. I love talking about things like this. So having physical copies allows me to talk much more easily than talking briefly through a screen recording of my Steam library, as I've done in the past. You'll notice I don't really talk about digital games too much anymore. It's just physical games that I talk about in these videos because they're about my collection. Now, I collect for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is preservation. The idea that nothing lasts forever. Eventually those download servers will go down and you won't be able to download digital copies of games anymore. So the only way to play them will be physical copies. If the media, if the physical media itself doesn't degrade over time. And if well kept, they can last a lot longer than you might expect. In fact, I've got literal games that are almost 40 years old, if not more, that are still in really good condition and are still very much playable. But the problem with like game key cards or these basically empty discs that act as game keys is that if those download servers go down, all you've got is a hunk of plastic that is completely, absolutely useless. That game then becomes lost media unless it's archived somewhere digitally through like archive.org or what have you as a pirated copy. And we've already seen this happen with various digital storefronts, like particularly for Nintendo, on the Wii eShop, the DSi eShop, the 3DS eShop and the Wii U eShop recently, where those download servers are still up. So if you bought those games back in the day, you can still re-download them, but you cannot go and buy new games now. So unless you already owned a copy of those games, your only choice is to pirate it or wait and hope that somebody re-releases it somewhere. That it's available legally somewhere else. And so as a collector and a preservationist, I'm very much against the idea of these game key cards and what have you that don't have the actual game data on the physical medium, because like I said, they're going to be useless at some point in the future, well before the physical media itself or the physical hardware itself becomes useless. And unfortunately, I get why they're doing it. Like, Nintendo especially really loves having a physical spot in retail. Xbox is doing this more and more often too, but they're also trying to push people towards Game Pass and lean away from physical sales entirely, where they don't even care if you buy an Xbox anymore as long as you are subscribed to Game Pass. They don't care if you're playing Xbox games on your desktop computer, your laptop, your Xbox Series S, your Xbox Series X, on your handheld PC, on your TV, on your phone, whatever. As long as you're in that ecosystem, that's all they care about, and paying a subscription to them, that's all they care about. But Nintendo wants that physical retail spot, in part because they're still very much the family-centric company, and very much like geared towards families and kids and stuff like that. Even when they release games that are very much more intended for a more mature, more adult audience, they're still very much in that family-friendly mindset. And it's very, very easy for that more casual market to, for parents and grandparents and so on, to pick a game up off a shelf and then wrap it and give it to little Jimmy or little Sally on a birthday, or put it under the tree for Christmas or what have you. And physical games make great gifts. They absolutely do. There is something to be said about getting gift cards as gifts around Christmas time, because it's almost like cash where you can basically use it for whatever you want. However, there's something more personal about a physical present, because there's always more thought put into it about what the person you're giving to would like, and what their interests are and stuff like that. So you always have to think more about that kind of stuff. And so having that physical retail presence is very important to Nintendo. And Game Key cards allow them to do that while still cutting back on the costs of printing these games. Because the biggest downfall for Nintendo back in the day was their refusal to adopt disc-based, optical media. Their refusal to switch to CDs from cartridges for the N64. That was their biggest downfall, because the N64 was actually the most powerful system of its generation, of a console of its generation, but it was held back by how expensive those proprietary cartridges were and how little storage those cartridges were. Optical discs, CDs, could hold literally 10 times the amount of storage, 100 times the amount of storage. Actually, I think it was more like sometimes in excess of like 200 times the amount of data storage. And because most N64 ROMs are like literally less than 6 megabytes. But most PS1 games, especially because they relied so heavily on CD quality audio and FMVs, are in the hundreds of megabytes because of that, extra storage space. And CDs were so much cheaper to make that N64 games were often held back by the storage the limitations of the storage medium itself, and they were often more expensive because of how much more expensive it was to actually make the cartridges versus CDs. And that is something that has continued to plague Nintendo throughout handheld, and now with the Switch Hybrid, where you don't want CDs in there because it would you'd have issues with, you don't want discs in there because you would have issues with scratching on a handheld thing, getting jostled around and stuff like that. So that's why they stuck with these small little game cards for the Switch. But again, the flash memory inside those is not cheap. It's so much cheaper to press an HD Blu-ray disc than it is a Nintendo Switch card, even though an HD, a dual layer HD Blu-ray disc can hold up to 100 gigabytes, literally 100 gigabytes of storage, whereas a Nintendo Switch game card tops out at like 64 gigabytes, and that is like way more expensive. So it seems for the Switch 2, you've got two options. You either pay the extra money for that 64 gigabyte game card, or you do the much cheaper game key card, where it's literally just like a few megabytes of data that allows you to download a copy off the eStore and lets you play it as long as you have the game card plugged in. So the advantages for Nintendo are much cheaper production costs, while maintaining that physical retail space and still allowing gamers to lend out these game cards and trade them in and resell them and stuff like that, because the game license is tied to the card and not your account, like it would be if you bought it off of the eShop or off of like any digital game bought off of a digital storefront. So or using like a download code on a card or whatever. Like PC doesn't really do physical games anymore at all, and if they do, they are literally a code in a box, and then that code gets tied to your Steam account or your Epic Games account or what have you, and at which point you can't download it, or you can't trade it in, you can't lend it out, you can't resell it, you can't do anything. So you're stuck with it, even if it's a game that you don't like. Now, some digital stores do have refund policies that will let you refund a game bought off the store and stuff like that, but even still, basically, these game key cards in Nintendo's mind give all of the advantage of physical medium, of properly having a physical copy of the game, but also the advantages of digital, where they don't have to spend as much making the physical copy and stuff like that. But again, it ends up becoming a nightmare for preservation and stuff like that. So anyways, that is the end of that rant. Maybe I'll do more of these kinds of rants and stuff like that in the future. But for now, that is it. I'm going to hopefully do another one of these in a few weeks if I can get my hands on a Switch 2. But we will see, because I was not able to secure a pre-order. So we will see what happens. I know that comes out in a couple weeks. Anyways, until then, I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Please remember to comment, like the video, and subscribe. See ya.